Hello my friends, welcome back to r/Prorevenge, where you'll hear stories about people getting what they deserve. In this episode, OP pulls the ultimate revenge prank on his father by pretending to have a boyfriend. And the second story is one that gave me a really good laugh, guys, and it's why you should never mess with a sound guy at a concert. I hope you stay for the stories today and do hit that subscribe button for future videos. Ever since I can remember, I've been completely and utterly under the thumb of my father. All of us have been, and us being me, my younger brother, my little sister, and my mother. My father is a male chauvinist, over-the-top, macho type of guy, and I've always been the victim growing up of his dislike. The reason was, I didn't really fit in with his image of the ideal son. I was, for lack of a better word, a bit of a girly boy growing up. I wanted nothing more than to dance and frolic around in dresses. When I was about 4 or 5, my mother had this big box of dress-up clothes. She brought it down from the attic, and I immediately picked out the prettiest, frilliest golden-colored dress I could find. I pranced around in it and declared myself a princess, and that I was now a girl. This went on for a few months, but strictly during the day when my father was away at work. I watched ballet videos with my mother, who's a soft-spoken and open-minded woman who worked part-time as a social worker in those days, and I was happy, careless. My father was, and is, an authoritarian figure. He had himself legally emancipated at an early age, just so he can join the army ahead of time. After 3 years in the army, he left as a lower-level officer and started a career as a seaman. He was a captain when he and my mother met and had me. Later, he left his naval career and became a traveling salesman. Think Don Draper, if Don Draper was a 6'4" Western European man with curly graying hair and piercing blue eyes. I've always found him incredibly intimidating, and I think my mother did too. Anyway, long story short, he came home early one day. He saw me in my dress and told me in an icy cold voice, "Go and take that off. After you take it off, go sit on the sofa." So I took it off, my little hands trembling, and next, he summoned my mother into the room. He demanded to know what the hell she'd been doing to his boy. I've never seen a person shrink so much so quickly. I myself was like a little tiny fly on the wall at this point, barely present. He took the box with clothes up to the attic, put a lock on it, and informed us that we were not to touch it until they have a daughter, and it stayed there in the attic, untouched, until my sister was born 10 years later. My father took more of an interest in my upbringing after this point. He took me to see Navy ships, races, and made me go into martial arts. He seemed determined to make a man out of me, and in some ways, he succeeded. One thing he allowed me to do was to keep my hair long. I was bullied at school for it, and wanted at times to cut it off for that reason, but he insisted that I kept the long hair, to face the bullies and to beat the living daylights out of them every time they called me a girl, to show them how much of a girl I was, and I did just that, and it toughened me up in some way, but it also damaged me in other ways. By the time I went to college, I had grown into a pretty normal dude. I wasn't gay, and I wasn't even a crossdresser, although deep down inside I still had those urges. I tried desperately to fit in and be what he wanted me to be, but I also grew more and more resentful. In college, I made a lot of different friends, including some guys that I'd met in an acting class we both took. One of them was pretty much your typical flaming and fabulous type of guy. He was as over-the-top gay as my father was over-the-top straight. I told him one night when we were drinking about my upbringing and my terrible father, and my friend, let's call him Paul, suggested that I should get back at him. I asked him how, and basically he said, why not pretend I was gay? But not just say it over the phone or something, or even to my father's face in person. No, much better. I'd hint for weeks in advance about having met somebody and being in a relationship, and I'd say it was a girl. I would ask if I could bring Paula over for dinner, at Christmas, when the whole family would be there, and I'd arrive at the house with Paul instead. So I did exactly that. I went to the house at Christmas, dressed to the nines, and told my father and mother that Paula was caught up and she's about to come. I'll just open the door. So I sat down with my family, cousins, uncles, aunts, grandparents, who were just as conservative as my father. We waited a while, heard the door, and rushed to open it. Walked into the living room where everybody was gathered and introduced Paul, my boyfriend. I've never seen a room go so quiet. You could literally hear a pin drop. My sister, brother, and mother looked both scared and amused, but everybody else was in shock. And my father was seething. He completely lost it. Right in front of everybody, the veins bulging in his neck to the point where they looked like they were about to pop. And he told me to leave. Well, he ordered me essentially. My grandparents urged him not to make a scene, but he made one. I just replied calmly how he should do it, to call the police and explain the situation to them. I knew he never would. He knew some of the officers well, and it wasn't a call he would be willing to make, and it wasn't a situation he was willing to explain. I called his bluff, and he just sank, like he shrank before my eyes. My mother and grandmother had to calm him down. He walked out of the room defeated. I just stood there, not believing my own eyes. I finally felt free. He had scared me for so many years, terrified me, and now I could see him for the caricature he really was, and it felt amazing. Paul and I stayed the whole evening, and he played his part perfectly. He eventually managed to charm some of my aunts, and even my grandmother, who told me unironically how she was glad that I found such a delightful man, and that he reminded her of her favorite TV character, Mr. Humphreys from Are You Being Served, who's such a doll. My father later came back into the room, sat in a corner, sulking, refusing to meet my gaze. He drank too much whiskey, and my mother kept talking to him in a husband tone of voice, and he kept making the go away gesture with his hand. I stayed away from home for a while, and I've already explained to everyone how it was a prank, how I had to make a point to get back at my father for how he treated me, and pretty much everyone sympathized. I didn't lose anyone in my family over what happened, but my father lost a lot of respect in people's eyes, I feel. He was always in control of things. He always directed the scene, but now he doesn't anymore. I do my own thing, my sister does her own thing, and he cannot order people around anymore, and I feel like a fool for ever letting him. I can now wear whatever the hell I want to wear, enjoy whatever hobbies I want to enjoy, and nothing changes. He threatened to disown me that night. He threatened a lot of things, but in the end, something inside him just broke. All of my relationships have since been with women, and I've since been married and had children of my own. My younger brother came out gay eventually, but by that time, my now aging father has mellowed down somewhat, as he already has his grandchildren and his legacy is thus secured, and he didn't seem to mind much. It helps that my brother is a muscular gym rat, and they bond over sports, more than my father and I ever did. But whenever the subject of sexuality comes up, my father is still incredibly awkward. I don't think it'll ever change, but I feel my revenge has been pretty successful in the end. You know what? It's ironic that OP's father taught him to stand up to bullies his whole life, and in the end, he stood up to the biggest bully of all. Bravo, OP. Bravo. Oh, and just from reading the comments, OP is best friends with Paul, and Paul is the godfather for his daughter. How sweet is that? A pretty wholesome ending to a pro-revenge. I would have loved to see the dad's face when OP brought Paul in, and not Paula. This story's titled, The Suck Button. My band's drummer John is also a sound guy for several years before we hooked up musically. He had been doing sound for the other bands I was in, as well as for touring acts that I booked shows for. He's very good at what he does, and has a pretty massive rig. Anyway, he's the nicest guy in the world at band practice, at Burger King, or at a gig we're playing, but when he's running sound for other bands, he can be pretty crabby. He has very little patience for bands who start late or end late, and even less patience for bands who take an encore when they're the second band playing out of 5. He also has very little patience for singers who ask for more vocals in the monitor while cupping the microphone ball in both hands, which causes a lot of feedback. In general, he's just an altogether grouchy sound man. For example, he ran sound once for the 7 or 8-piece band. One of the trombone players said he needed 2 mics, one for his horn and one for his backup vocals. Normally at this venue, which is a 120-seater, John didn't bother to mic the horns at all. Rolling his eyes, John put up a Shure Beta 58 and some AKG condenser mic, and he says, "This Shure microphone is for your vocals, and this AKG one is for your horn, okay? Don't blow your horn into the vocal mic, because your horn is about 30 decibels louder than your voice, and I'm gonna have everything mixed properly." The horn player nods his head. During the second song of the set, apparently, this trombonist was set to get a solo. Right before his solo starts, he grabs both mics, pushes them together so that the capsules are actually touching, and then he blows his fortissimo opening note into both mics. I was sitting at the table in the back by the soundboard at the time, and John's limiters caught most of it, and I still had ringing in my ears for 2 days. At the end of the song, John mutes both of the guy's mics and leaves them on mute, and basically threatens to remount the guy's plumbing with his own horn if he ever pulls that stuff again. John does this through his talkback mic, which is clearly audible over the monitors. The crowd bursts into laughter, and the horn player goes bright red in the face. At any rate, for years, I'd heard John threaten bands with the suck button. Bands who were taking too long to set up, or whose members repeatedly refused to follow directions, would be threatened. He'd always say something like, "Pull that again and I'm gonna hit the suck button on you guys." I took it to mean he would intentionally make them sound bad, but he never followed through on the threat, so I took it as a vague, general warning. So anyway, a little while back, he's running the sound on a 4-band show. The second band has him running 20 minutes behind before they even play a note because their lead guitarist was late. Their allotted set time is 40 minutes, but their last song runs over by the time it's done. They've played for almost 45 minutes, and John says quietly over the talkback mic, "Hey guys, you're done." The lead singer says loudly over the vocal mic, "The sound man says we gotta get off stage, but we got one more song for you," as they kick into another soupy jangle rock tune. John shakes his head at me, and then the most amazing thing happens. After their encore, this band kicks straight into another song without announcing it, apparently in the hopes that John wouldn't notice it was a different song. John leans over to me to be heard over the PA and says, "Hey, you want to see the suck button?" I said, "Sure." I figured he was gonna muck with the levels, or just turn them off or something. Instead, he reaches into one of his racks and starts scrolling through patches on his trusty Digitech unit. Sure enough, he gets to a patch titled "Suck Button." He engages it, and all hell breaks loose on stage. The lead singer and the lead guitarist, who was singing backup, immediately start to sing way off key. They try to get back into tune, they fail, and they trail off midline and try again, and start glaring at each other. The guitarist is so distracted by this that he starts messing up the chord progression and goes way off tempo. The whole song was pretty much derailed. The guys were singing out of tune, playing off tempo, and it was glorious. For the entire 4-minute duration of the song, I was treated to this stupid band sounding like crap, and getting madder and madder at each other. John explained the patch to me. Basically, it shifts the pitch of all the tracks from the vocal submix up 1 step, but only in the monitors. So the audience was treated to the sound of 2 guys trying to get into tune, only to be utterly confused at each other singing, and thought it was the other guy who was singing out of tune. I just about died laughing. Don't mess with sound guys at concerts. Who'd have thought? And that's it for this episode of r/Prorevenge. If you guys enjoyed that story, hit the thumbs up. If you're unsubscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future revenge stories. And I'll see you guys in the next one.